For as long as people have called this place home, they've been welcomed with clean air, clean water, and an abundance of nature. As time went on, people saw the need to balance how we build cities with how we protect farms and forests. That's why across Greater Portland, in 24 cities and 3 counties, there's one metro government that brings us all together to maintain that vital balance, to provide services across cities and counties, to create a better future together. Hello, we're Metro. We plan for housing, jobs, and safe transportation. We protect land, air, and water by managing garbage and recycling. We support arts and culture by overseeing local venues to keep the economy growing. And we connect people to nature across 17,000 acres of parks and trails and at the Oregon Zoo. Metro is all of us working together, connecting how we live today with how we plan for the future. Hello, we're Metro, and so are you.
I'd like to call the Metro Council business meeting for April 11th, 2023 to order. We have a quorum. Connor, will you please call the roll for attendance?
Yes, thank you, President Peterson. Councillor Simpson.
Present.
Councillor Rosenthal.
Present.
Councillor Wong.
Present.
Councillor Lewis.
Present.
Councillor Nolan.
Present.
And President Peterson.
Here, thanks. Before we begin our agenda items, councilors, Connor, can you please play the safety video for our in-person attendees?
Hi, I'm Justin Dunlap, and I'm the department head stagehand electrician at the Arlene Schnitzer Concert Hall. Safety is a big part of my job. From electrical, making sure that I stay up to date on the NFPA codes and regulations, to rigging, where we make sure that everything is safely suspended overhead, to egress, ensuring that our audiences, performers, and technicians have the safest possible route in case of emergency. I'm out here at the Arlene Schnitzer Concert Hall, and you're in the Metro Regional Center. Please note that we're on the 3rd floor of the building. In the event of a fire or fire alarm, please exit through the door in the northeast corner of the room. Go down the steps to the 2nd floor and exit through the main entrance by the reception desk. We will meet in the courtyard outside that entrance. In the event of a medical or fire emergency, please call 911 and notify the security agent at the front desk. The nearest defibrillator is mounted on the steps leading from the reception desk down to Grand Avenue.
Great, thank you. We will now open up our public communications portion of our meeting on non-agenda items. Connor, will you please describe to the audience our procedures for the public communication portion of this meeting?
Yes, thank you, President Peterson. So if anyone wishes to testify on non-agenda items, now is the time to do so. Public testimony will be limited to 3 minutes, and we'll be managing a timer to go off at the 3-minute mark. If you've not already signed up to speak, you can do so now by raising your hand if you're on Zoom, or by filling out one of the blue cards in the back of the room and bringing that up to me. So for those testifying on Zoom today, I'll be promoting you to a full panelist. So I'll call your name. You'll see a window pop up asking you to accept that promotion. Once you click accept, you'll rejoin as a panelist, where you'll be able to turn on your camera and unmute yourself. As a reminder to everybody testifying today, you do not need to give your physical address. However, please do identify yourself for the record before testifying. So I'll just give folks another minute to get their hands up if they would like to testify. And once again, this is on non-agenda items. Councilors and President Peterson, we've not had anybody sign up in advance to speak, and we haven't had any written testimony submitted. And with that, I still don't see any hands up, President Peterson.
Thank you, Connor. With that, seeing no hands raised, I will close the public communication portion of the meeting on non-agenda items, and we will move on to our presentations. We have the proposed fiscal year 2023-24 budget presentation today. Metro's Chief Operating Officer, Marisa Madrigal, in her capacity as Metro's Budget Officer, is here to present that proposed budget and budget message to the Metro Council, sitting as the Metro Budget Committee, which I will call into session in just a minute. Marisa will also be joined by Metro Auditor Brian Evans and Chief Financial Officer Brian Kennedy. After that presentation, I'll ask that the accompanying resolution be read into the record, then open things up for council discussion. So, councilors, I will now close the Metro Council business meeting, and I will open a meeting of the Budget Committee. We have, Connor, will you please read the resolution by title only?
Yes, thank you. Resolution number 23-5321 for the purpose of approving the FY 2023-24 budget, setting property tax levies and transmitting the approved budget to the Multnomah County Tax Supervising and Conservation Commission.
Councilors, any questions, discussion at this point on the resolution? All right, with that, I will open up the public hearing on resolution number 23-5321. Connor, will you please describe to the audience again our procedures for a public hearing?
Yes, thank you. So now if anyone wishes to testify on resolution number 23-5321, now is the time to do so. Once again, public testimony will be limited to 3 minutes, and we'll be managing the timer to go off at that 3-minute mark. And once again, if you are just joining now, if you would like to sign up to speak and have not already, you can do so by hitting the raise hand button. Depending on your version of Zoom, that's at the bottom of your screen or within the reactions tab. If you're joining us in person, you can sign up by bringing one of the blue cards on the back of the room up to me. Yes.
Connor, can you pause for one moment? We have a legal question. Pardon me, Council President Peterson. We just need to confer about the order of the hearing and the presentation. Could we have 1 minute to review the order of operations? Is that
Yes,
okay with
thank
you,
you.
Council President? Thank you.
Thank you, Madam President and members of the council. My recommendation is that we first actually go to the budget presentation by COO Madrigal, and then we open up for the public hearing. So if that meets with, council's approval, not that we need to do anything differently with the public hearing, we'll just hold off on that and move first my recommendation into the budget presentation by COO Madrigal, and then after council has an opportunity to ask sort of questions related specifically to those budget presentations, then we will open a public hearing for any public comment. Is that make sense
Yes,
with council?
that actually makes much more sense than the way that this was laid out, so I appreciate that.
Okay.
So, council, we will move on to our presentation on the budget. As I had recently just talked about, we have the 3 presenters, our COO, our auditor, and our chief financial officer. With that, I'll turn it over to Marisa Madrigal, our COO, to start the presentation.
Thank you, Council President Peterson, and good morning, councilors. It's a delight to be here with you today, presenting the fiscal year 2023-24 proposed budget for Metro. I'm joined today, as President Peterson said, with Chief Financial Officer Brian Kennedy and our Auditor Evans. Next slide. And do we have the slide up for the folks at home?
Yes, the slide is up on Zoom, and okay, there we go.
Okay. Thank you. So today's presentation is intended to be a high-level overview of the proposed budget for your deliberation. Throughout the rest of this month, you will hear from Metro's individual programs and departments as they explain their proposed budgets and goals for the fiscal year beginning July 1st. Today's presentation will include an overview of the budget process, highlights from my budget message, an overview of the context in which this budget was crafted and in which you are considering it. You will receive an independent briefing from the Metro Auditor regarding their budget. As a reminder, the auditor proposes his budget to you directly to avoid any real or perceived conflicts. We will then review the next steps in the budget schedule, including key milestones and approval dates, and we will end with the public hearing that we just spoke about. Next slide. Here are the key milestones in Metro's budget process. These milestones are governed by Oregon budget law. A month from today, after a series of budget work sessions and public hearings, you will consider a resolution to approve the budget. June 1st, you'll participate in the Tax Supervising and Conservation Commission hearing, which is a requirement of Oregon budget law. And then final adoption of the budget is scheduled for June 22nd, 2023, and will become effective July 1st. Next slide, please. This budget arrives 3 years after the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic and 1 year after our region and state began to regain a sense of normalcy. Our venues, the Oregon Zoo, Oregon Convention Center, Expo Center, and Portland 5 Center for the Arts are full and vibrant again. New initiatives such as the Supportive Housing Services Program and Affordable Housing Bond are seeing concrete success in getting people into new housing. Our parks are open, 2019 park bond acquisitions have begun, grants are out the door, and illegal dumping around the region has been stemmed. However, simply climbing out of the hole of the pandemic is not enough to ensure that Metro is contributing to a healthy and vibrant future for our region. Our region still faces a steep uphill climb to overcome reputational damage related to perceptions of rampant crime and houselessness in its largest city. The number of people living unsheltered remains too high, and overall availability and affordability of housing is too low across the region and state. Key sectors of the regional workforce are understaffed, creating challenges for the jurisdictional partners we rely on to implement our programmatic funding, from the housing and homeless services sector to the local planning and development industry. The proposed budget seeks to address those challenges we know are the public's top priority in a number of ways. The budget also continues our work to strengthen core administrative capacity so that our collective time, creativity, and productivity is focused on serving our community, not fixing internal breakdowns. Next slide. As directed by this council at our February budget retreat follow-up, this budget was designed through the lens of the strategic framework, Keep Our Promises and Build Back Better. Our stakeholders are holding us accountable to deliver on our commitments. They have shown faith in us by approving multiple funding measures over the last decade, and following through continues to be the single most important thing we can do to maintain credibility and our ability to work in the region. We also continue to be motivated by the lessons of the pandemic, that change for the better is not only possible, but essential to a healthy and vibrant region. Next slide. In February of 2023, the Metro Council set an intention to advance Metro's strategic framework by developing enterprise-wide strategic targets in 3 key areas aimed at addressing these pressing challenges: housing, the economy, and the environment. While the Council will not adopt the specific targets until July 2023, this budget nonetheless advances the Council's intentions with some key investments in those target areas. This is not comprehensive, but is meant to highlight some key investments in those target areas. The proposed budget includes $425,000 to support a regional housing analysis conducted jointly by the Housing Department and Planning, Development, and Research. It includes $300,000 to fund 2 new FTEs in the Supportive Housing Services Program, who will provide technical assistance to providers and assist with regional recruitment efforts for jobs in the housing and homeless services sector. It includes $970,000 to support the 2024 Urban Growth Boundary Review process, which also overlaps with your economy and environmental targets as well. It includes $23 million in affordable housing bond awards to partner jurisdictions for housing projects, and that dollar amount represents the final available allotment of affordable housing bond funding. In fiscal year 23-24, all funds will have been committed, and the program will begin to wind down into an oversight phase. Not on the slide, but vitally important, the budget also includes $1.5 million targeting planning and development grants for projects within the urban growth boundary. These funds can help cities and counties improve land readiness for housing development. The budget includes $253,000 to support phase 2 of the Expo Futures project, including a market analysis and redevelopment feasibility study. It includes $295,000 to fund an equitable development program manager in planning, research, and development, and $3.1 million to support TV Highway, 82nd Avenue, and Southwest Corridor planning that includes small business development. In the bucket of environment, this budget includes $5 million for land acquisition to preserve habitat, $3.8 million for habitat restoration, $1.7 million for capital improvements, increasing sustainability, a modest but important $36,000 to bring Metro's energy purchases to 100% renewable energy, and funding in our materials and supplies for the scoping of the Climate Justice Task Force. A huge way that Metro is attempting to live the strategic framework to keep our promises and build back better is through our investments to advance racial justice. In addition to expanding the use of a budget equity tool used in the formation of the budget, this proposed budget invests $330,000 to implement Metro's Reimagining Policing and Security Vision and Action Plan. This funding supports project management positions in the Office of the COO and Parks and Nature, and it represents a major step forward to make good on the Metro Council's commitment to change how Metro interacts with the policing and carceral system in the wake of George Floyd's murder by the police in 2020. The budget also includes $458,000 to fund a cultural and historic resources program in Metro's Capital Asset Management Department with staff and materials and services, as well as an archaeologist in Parks and Nature. These positions are key to ensuring that Metro's capital program and land management practices are aligned with Metro's commitment to honoring the histories of land now occupied by Metro and strengthening relationships with tribal governments and Indigenous communities. During the fiscal year 21-22 budget process, Council directed staff to implement a budget equity tool. Acknowledging Councilor Nolan specifically for fiercely advocating for Metro's budget process to reflect our commitment to equity. Council's fiscal year 22 budget note number 6 required staff to implement a budget equity tool during the budget process. I directed the DEI and FRS departments to work collaboratively on this effort and to achieve Council's vision. The budget equity tool's long-term objectives include resourcing departments to achieve equity goals, aligning budget with BIPOC community and staff priorities, and communicating Metro's equity efforts and investments. As you recall, last year was the first year of this work. We developed a framework, asked departments to develop initial equity outcomes, and identify potential metrics. As you can see on this slide, implementation of the metrics was done in silos and staff engagement was inconsistent. This is a new body of work for the agency that will continue to evolve. Over the last 9 months, we've built on year one's framework and will continue to refine department metrics and our systems for tracking progress. The project team will develop a multi-year plan for this initiative and will provide a roadmap for achieving Council's vision and help advance equity. Over the next month, you will hear each department speak about their equity metrics, and in the interest of time, we've asked each department to focus on one, but we do have others. They will provide context for the metric and share baseline data collected on that metric. This data could be quantitative and or qualitative and is intended to serve as that baseline for the future years of data collection. It's important to note that departments are at different stages of development based on the requirements of their programmatic work. And again, these aren't the only metrics that departments use to track and measure their performance, but they are the ones that we're highlighting. The finance and DEI teams have taken a thorough approach to this work, and it's been very meaningful for all of us. I'm now going to pass the mic to our CFO, Brian Kennedy, who is going to review the budget environment and the numbers. Thank you.
Thank you, Marisa. Again, my name is Brian Kennedy, and I'm the Chief Financial Officer for Metro. I'm going to start by talking about the budget environment, so the context in which we have prepared the proposed budget for your consideration. Last year, we used a similar framework where we started talking about the headwinds and tailwinds that Metro is dealing with in our budget context. So from a headwind perspective, some of these are the same. As Marisa mentioned, we continue to have regional struggles with housing affordability and homelessness, which present both policy challenges for Metro, but also internal challenges when it comes to recruiting and retaining staff. Inflation and interest rates continue to be a challenge in a variety of contexts in Metro's budget. And particularly when we think about the venues, we are dealing with ongoing reputational damage, coming from the pandemic, last several years of the pandemic, which has affected our ability to attract business and grow the venues from the kind of the depths of their pandemic losses. From a tailwind perspective, we continue to have voter-approved programs, both the Parks and Nature 2019 bond and the Supportive Housing Services program, that provide a strong foundation for having the ability to make positive changes in some of those challenges we're facing in the region. And coming out of the pandemic, Metro is in a very stable financial condition. The hard choices we made early on, as well as the conservative financial management we implemented during the pandemic, have put us in a good position. We're not fully recovered, but we are very stable, and in a number of areas, we're stronger than we were before the pandemic, all of which set us up for kind of a strong financial condition over the next several years and the ability to deliver on the policy outcomes that the region expects. Next slide, please. So some of the significant changes in the budget, as Marisa mentioned, there are new investments advancing Metro's reimagining policing and security vision and action plan. We have the creation of the Cultural and Historic Resources Program, and then some new investments in racial equity and climate justice strategies. Next slide. So the budget by fund, this slide is small, but this provides a high-level view of the budget. For fiscal year 23-24, the budget in total represents over $1.7 billion and a little over 1,100 staff. The significant changes, financial changes you can see in the operating funds, there's an overall increase, mostly driven by pandemic recovery in our visitor venues. The bond funds and the debt service funds really don't have any significant changes. And then in the other funds, the one thing I will note is at the very bottom of the slide, the supportive housing services, you can see in fiscal year 22-23, the total was around $240 million, and the total for fiscal year 23-24 is over $400 million. That is not showing that we are collecting over $400 million in personal and business income taxes. That is an accounting issue where when we distribute funds to the counties, we only record those funds as expended when the county expends them. So we show on our books that those resources are still, we show them on Metro's books, even though the counties have physical control of the resources. And when the counties expend that money, those totals will decrease. So our budget for fiscal year 23-24 looks very large, but it's an accounting issue.
Madam President.
Yes. Councilor Nolan.
May I ask a clarifying question?
Yeah.
Is this chart then reflecting expenditures, not fund balances?
This chart is reflecting appropriation authority. So this is what we have budgeted. And so relating to the supportive housing services, even though the cash has been dispersed, we will need to book budgetary transactions when the counties expend those funds. So we need to have sufficient appropriation authority. And so really what this is reflecting is the authority to kind of book budgetary transactions for cash dispersed in both fiscal year 22-23 as well as 23-24.
I'm not sure that clarified things, but I'm sure it made sense to you. Sorry. But the numbers, if I may, Madam President, the numbers here reflect appropriation authority to spend money, either
Correct.
a Metro department head or through an IGA. Thank you.
That's correct. I apologize for the confusion on the supportive housing services issue. The accounting is very complicated for some of these intergovernmental relationships. Next slide, please. This chart shows all of the expenses, so the totals in that previous chart, the 1.7 in budget authority, how it breaks down by category. Metro is a little unusual in that you can see the largest section of the pie chart is materials and services expenses. If you looked at most other governments, a larger portion would be in personal services, but Metro is a little bit unusual. Part of this reflects the payments that we make to other jurisdictions for supportive housing services, the affordable housing bond, local share through Parks and Nature, but also the fact that large parts of some of our operations are contracted out, including solid waste, transfer station operations, and food and beverage services at the venues. So our materials and services portion of the budget is larger than you would expect from a general purpose government. Our total current expenditures, so this chart represents about $1 billion of our $1.7 billion budget. The balance is held in contingency and unappropriated fund balance, reserves that for cash we have on hand but do not expect to spend in the current or the next fiscal year.
Madam Chair, may I ask a clarifying question?
Yes, Counselor.
Just a question on the monies that we spend or that we allocate for construction of housing, which we give to the various housing agencies. Does that come under capital outlay or under materials and services?
It's under materials and services. We
Okay.
categorize it as a payment to another government agency.
Okay, not as a construction cost. Okay.
And because those capital assets are not reflected on our financial statements, they're reflected on the financial statements of the government that builds the capital project.
Thank you.
Next slide, please. So our 10-year expenditure history, so the two bars on the far right are showing the budget. The prior bars are showing actuals. You can see that, and the blue bar is capital expenditures, and then, or current expenditures, sorry, and then the red is transfers. The large spike in fiscal year 22-23 and 23-24 reflects it in the budget. We have significant balances for the affordable housing bond, for the Parks and Nature bond, other capital reserves that we hold, and we have to budget. We have to reflect them in the budget one way or the other, either as a planned expenditure or as a contingency or unappropriated ending fund balance. So that makes our budget in those years look very large, but you can see our annual expenditures are significantly less, in that $400 to $500 million range. The black line is showing our ending fund balance. So that's a reflection of the cash we have on hand. You see that number start to spike in fiscal year 2018, 2019, which is when we sold the affordable housing bonds, and then another increase with the Parks and Nature bonds that we sold in 2020. The line drops in the budget because we have to appropriate those funds. That ending fund balance will not drop as low as we expect, or as this chart shows, as those projects are phased in over time. But this chart kind of shows that tells the story of how Metro has changed over the last decade with the passage of the affordable housing bond, the Parks and Nature bond, the supportive housing services program, that has brought significant new resources into Metro. Next slide, please. We also like to show the 10-year change in our full-time equivalent employees. So the chart on the left is showing our budgeted positions, so our full-time equivalents. You'll notice kind of a steady increase in time with a significant pandemic dip in fiscal year 2021, but we have recovered from that and grown beyond. Part of that is a reflection that right before the pandemic, the Parks and Nature bond had passed, but we didn't fully realize kind of the impact of that operations until later. And then the supportive housing services program has added beyond that. The chart on the right shows our variable hour staff. You'll notice there's nothing there for fiscal year 23-24. That's because we don't budget for specific variable hour positions. This is a count on the number of actual variable hour employees we had in any given year. And this clearly shows the kind of striking impact of the pandemic, and that recovery in that area is still slow. That some of the venues, even as economic activity is coming back, it's not fully at the level that we had pre-pandemic, and that recovery continues. Next slide, please. Metro's debt service obligations are also a significant part of the budget. Some of our biggest investments in the region through affordable housing, through Parks and Nature, the prior Zubon program, that debt is still outstanding, and that represents a significant obligation of the agency that's backed by property taxes. And what this chart shows is that while we do have significant debt, it is declining year over year. We will collect property taxes every year to continue to pay that off and reduce that debt service obligation over time. Next slide, please. So when the council takes action on the budget, the council takes two specific actions. One is ultimately adopting the budget, and the second piece is setting the property tax levy. There are actually three components to that property tax action that the council will take. The first is setting the Metro permanent rate, and our staff recommendation would be to levy the full permanent rate of 9.66 cents per thousand. The second action is levying the local option levy tax rate, also at 9.6 cents per thousand of assessed value. And then the third piece is levy the debt service levy, so to pay off that general obligation debt from the 2006 Parks and or Natural Areas Bond, the 2008 Zoo Bond, the 2019 Parks and Nature Bond, and the 2018 Affordable Housing Bond. So that debt service levy is actually expressed as a dollar amount to pay the specific amount of debt service. We provide an estimate of what that will be on a cents per thousand basis, similar to our permanent rate and local option levy. And our estimate for fiscal year 23-24 is that total debt service rate will go from 39 cents per thousand to 38 cents per thousand. Metro's commitment to the voters has been to keep that debt service levy at 40 cents per thousand or less. So we're below the commitment that Metro has made to the voters over the series of general obligation bond measures that have been referred to the voters. Next slide, please. At this point, I will turn it over to Auditor Evans.
Great, thanks, Brian. Good afternoon, Council. Appreciate the opportunity to present my proposed budget to you directly. As a reminder, this is an opportunity for me to show some independence and make sure that the budget proposal is made directly to you and not by those that we audit. Next slide, please. Oh, maybe we don't have my slides. Okay. I'll give you a quick brief overview because I don't want to take up too much of your time. The first slide is really looking at our mission. So just as a reminder for you on the council as well as those at home, we have three primary missions: ensure Metro is accountable to the public, ensure Metro activities are transparent, and improve the efficiency, effectiveness, and quality of Metro services and programs. Just going to give a brief summary. There we go. Thank you. Wait just a second. Okay, thanks. Next slide, please. Great. So before I talk about the budget for this coming year, I just wanted to give you a brief overview of our accomplishments to date. We've completed 3 audits. We've managed a number of reports to the Accountability Hotline. We've continued to administer the contract for the financial audit and have a couple of new public members joining the audit committee later this month. And then we've hired 3 new employees. So it's been a time of change in my office, and I'm excited about the new energy that folks are bringing. Next slide, please. Just a reminder of the 3 audits that have been completed so far. The surplus property audit and Portland 5 intergovernmental agreements were published over the summer and presented to Metro Council in September of last year. And our follow-up audit of the Code of Ethics was presented last month to Council. Next slide, please. So now looking for the coming year, we are proposing a very similar budget as we have in the past. If you might remember, our previous slides look a lot like this. It's a lot of personnel costs. I've changed the color, but it's always the biggest chunk. And then we have a number of smaller expenditures for materials and services, and those personal expenditures cover 5 full-time equivalent employees. Next slide, please. This slide gives you a quick summary of previous years, and I just want to point out 2 things. One is that there's a change in materials and services is kind of the biggest change over the 3 years that you can see up here. The first change, which was implemented last year, was basically additional M&S funding to hire a fellow through Portland State University. And this year, we're proposing to extend that fellowship to an 8-month position, as well as add some money for subject matter expertise. That was a standing line item budget that we had prior to COVID that was cut during the budget cuts, but I'd like to add that back in so that we have some flexibility if an audit requires some outside expertise to help us reach conclusions about our audit topics. Next slide, please. Pivoting to the future, you can expect to see a number of reports from us coming out in the next several months. We have work going on to look at Metro's Parks and Nature bond measure, to look at solid waste transfer station operations, and then 2 housing-related audits that are underway. And you can expect to see those reports in June and July of this year. Be happy to answer any questions you may have, or if you want to wait till the end, that's fine too.
Thank you, Audrey. We'll wait to the end. Is that the end of the presentation?
We just have a
Melissa?
couple more slides. If you could bring back up the prior presentation, moving the budget forward.
Thank you.
All right, just to wrap things up. So while the budget process has been going on for a number of months at the staff level, today signifies the beginning of the process with the Metro Council and the public. So on the next steps, let's see, I think, could we go back one slide? One more? Okay, sorry, next slide. So in terms of the public's opportunity to weigh in on the budget, we have a number of public hearings. So there are 5 public hearings scheduled over the next couple of months. One of those on June 1st is officially the Tax Supervising and Conservation Commission's public hearing on Metro's budget. We have also posted to the Metro website a list of all of the department budget presentations and opportunities for the public to weigh in on Metro's budget. Next slide, please. For the council, specific council involvement in the budget, when it comes to budget amendments, there are a number of key dates coming up where the council can make changes, propose changes to the budget. So the first round of amendments to the proposed budget are due on April 27th. Those will be considered by the council on May 9th. After that, the budget moves to the approved stage. So the amendments to the approved budget are due on May 26th, and council will consider any amendments that are proposed on June 13th. Next slide, please. So the key adoption milestones, so the budget moves from the proposed to the approved stage on May 11th. The most important thing that happens at that stage in the budget, or the second most important thing, is the setting of the tax rate. So the permanent tax rate, the local option levy rate, and the debt service levy. The Tax Supervising and Conservation Commission hearing is on June 1st. Their certification is required prior to adoption. And then final adoption of the budget is scheduled for June 22nd. That sets the appropriation levels as well as the imposition of property taxes. So with that, our staff presentation is complete and we're happy to answer any questions. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Melissa, any final comments?
No, I just appreciate the council's commitment to a 2-month process to adopt the budget. There's a lot of important services and programs and policy decisions before you. So really just look forward to the next few months. Thank you.
Thank you for kicking this off. Councilors, do you have any questions at this time before we go into a public hearing? Councilor Nolan.
Thank you, Madam President. I have 3 questions. I think they'll be pretty quick. You referenced in your opening comments about moving to 100% renewable energy. Can you tell me the timeline for doing that with our fleet as well?
That's an excellent question. I'll have to get back to you to get you an estimate on that, but happy to do that.
Okay. Since we are urging the world to electrify, I think we ought to be accelerating the electrification of our own fleet. Second question, Madam President, if I may. Equity metrics, thank you for putting in the hard work to make that an integral part of the budgeting process. When you do those metrics, I would urge that you consider a timeline that considers past outcomes and results. So that when we're defining equity, it isn't just at this moment of time, but equity maybe over the last 10 years. You may not have data for all the items that go back 10 years. But if we only look at today and think of progress, it will take us 100 years to reach equity. So we need a pace that reflects bond and the supportive housing services. And I would be interested in knowing, either in those or in future ones, if you have a process for coordinating with auditors of the counties that we work with, because they're the ones who actually implement those programs, or the housing authorities on the bond measure. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks for the question. It's something that we consider quite a bit. It's one of our requirements and audit standards that we coordinate with government auditors at all levels, so federal, state, local. Metro being a regional government is a little bit unique in that hierarchy, so we sometimes have to remind people, or can actually be a forum where folks can come together. So just to give you a quick flavor, when we did our original housing bond audit, I think in 2018, 2019, we did an informal work group with two other county auditors in the region that we're working on audits. So the Washington County Auditor's Office at that time and the Clackamas County Auditor's Office were both working on housing-related audits. We also did a similar process for the supportive housing services measure when it first came out in our first audit, and are continuing to do that in the current audits as well. So there's a group of local government auditors that meets quarterly, just generally about housing-related audits, and then the folks that are engaged with specific audits, we meet periodically to make sure that we understand the scope of each other's work and kind of the timing of when things are coming out.
Good to know. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Councillor Wong.
Great. Thank you, Madam President, and thanks to the staff for putting together this presentation. I think it's pretty clear and really reflects our priorities. And Brian, I was wondering if you could just talk us through some of the budget by fund, some of the larger change percentages. So I'm guessing for Merck Fund and the Oregon Zoo Operating Fund, that just reflects more business coming through the door. Is that correct? But I also see a 75% increase in the supportive housing services fund, and I'm not really sure how we have 75% more revenue this year.
Councillor Wong, Council President Peterson, those are excellent questions. So for the Merck Fund and the Oregon Zoo, those increases reflect recovery from the pandemic. So there's more business, more revenue, and more associated expenditures running through the budget. We're not back to pre-pandemic levels yet, but we're getting closer. And so that's the primary change there. On supportive housing services, this goes back to the earlier question from Councillor Nolan. This is really an accounting issue, which honestly, I feel like if I am up here talking to you about accounting during the budget process, kind of something terrible has happened. We shouldn't be talking about that right now. The shortest possible version of this is there's no change in how we collect the revenue. We expect that we're going to collect around $250 million a year in any fiscal year. And when that money comes into Metro, so it's transferred once a month from the city of Portland, within a week, we transfer that cash to the 3 counties. So the cash is at the counties have kind of full discretion under their local implementation plan to spend that money. We have an accounting determination that we came to working with the external auditor that Auditor Evans' office manages. And that accounting determination is that based on the control that Metro has over that money from our IGAs with the 3 counties, as well as the provisions in the Metro Code, that Metro has enough authority over how that money is spent that we can't actually expense it. We can't show it as spent on our financial statements until the counties spend it. The act of moving that money from our bank to the county's bank doesn't allow us, or that is not actually an expenditure because we still have control. So from a budgetary perspective, we still have to show all of those funds that we've dispersed to the counties, but they have not spent yet, as officially a resource of Metro. So that increase that you see from fiscal year 22-23 to 23-24 is a reflection of the unspent balances that the counties are holding, or that we expect them to be holding as of July 1st. So they have significant resources that we have collected in the current fiscal year and transferred to them that they have not yet spent. The moment they spend it, then it becomes, we reflect that expenditure in our financial statements, so we have to make sure that we have sufficient appropriation authority to budget for those expenses.
Okay, thanks. And does that mean, so as it's spent, then it's reflected differently on the balance sheet? So I guess my question is, in future years, does this number keep going up? Hundreds of
My
millions
hope
every year?
is that in future years, this number would go down, and that as the counties are spending more of that money in the year in which they receive it, that we will require less appropriation authority. Like, in an ideal world, the amount we budget should be roughly equal to of revenue that we expect to collect in a year. There's always going to be some underspending, some reserves that the counties holds, so they'll never match to 1, but that number should go down over time as the counties fully ramp up their program.
All right, thanks for the accounting lesson.
Thank you. Councilor Rosenthal.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a quick follow-up to Councilor Wein's question. My understanding is that, of course, this year, one of the reasons that the counties didn't spend money is they had trouble staffing up to spend the money. So assuming that that staffing issue goes away, that we should expect this to drop rather significantly over next year, I think. Is that correct?
I think it will drop. I'm not sure
How much?
exactly the timeline. We have some estimates that we have developed that were presented to the Oversight Committee. I think the kind of full ramp up is still 18 to 24 months out there, but it should accelerate over time.
And then I had one other question, which is on a not unrelated, we had a report.
And what is the outreach just for that communication? So I think if we could find some different venues of communication and kind of go through, so we all understand where we're at and maybe where we need to strengthen. And that might be a good work session in the future to have so that we're just providing more clarity for us of what's going on and more clarity of what our expectations are as a council.
Absolutely, and that's a great point. We do have, we are planning some engagements with you in the next month and a half or so, because the council has a role in approving the guiding principles and values for our community engagement plan, as well as our community engagement plan. And so that's a policy discussion that will come before you in the next 2 months.
That's awesome.
Thank you.
All right, Councilor Lewis.
Sure, thank you so much. This is a good overview of our global budget, the revenues and the funds, and we'll have different deep dives over the next few weeks. My question is along how our process really aligns with our calendar. So the 27th is the due date for any of our budget amendments. And I believe we'll probably have some of our departmental presentations after that date. Obviously, I think that the work that we do, trying to fit everybody in our very limited time together, is hard. What are our options if something comes up in those deeper dives, budget presentations by department after the 27th? Do we have a remedy?
Council President Peterson, Councilor Lewis, it's an excellent question. So there are two opportunities for council to make amendments to the budget. So there is one opportunity prior to the budget being approved, and then there's a second opportunity prior to the budget being adopted. And those deadlines simply reflect the fact that council needs to take action under Oregon local budget law to move the budget from the proposed to the approved and then approved to adopted stage. So the deadlines are arbitrary in the sense that they are connected to those steps in the budget process, but that first window is not the only window for the council to make changes.
Great, thank you so much for that clarification.
Great. With that, I don't see any other counselors' hands up. So I guess based on our attorney's permission, I will move on to the public hearing.
Yes, Connor, we should move on to that section. Just want to affirm what MCP just said.
Okay, thank you. So with that, I'll,
Thank you.
yes. I'll once again
I
read
need to
this.
open it up. Connor,
Yes?
I'm sorry, what's going on? You've taken over for the moment, and I don't know what you're doing.
Yeah, Council President Peterson, I think Carrie's going to jump in here because I think I gave Connor some inadvertent eye signal to begin to read the public hearing process. So yes, Council President Peterson, it would be great if you would open up the public hearing, and then Connor, if you would, as she directs, begin to provide directions as to how the members of the public can testify.
Thank you. It's hard to pick up on cues when I'm here. Thanks. Or not there. I will now open up the public hearing on resolution 321. Describe the.
Yes, thank you, President Peterson. And for your awareness, you're breaking up just a little bit there, but I think you opened up the public hearing. So if anyone wishes to testify on resolution number 23-5321, now is the time to do so. Public testimony will be limited to 3 minutes, and I'll be managing a timer to go off at the 3-minute mark. If you've not already signed up to speak, you can do so now. If you're joining us in person, you can fill out one of the blue cards in the back of the room and bring that up to me. If you're joining us virtually on Zoom, you can sign up to speak by hitting the raise hand button, which is either at the bottom of your screen or within the reactions tab. So for those joining us on Zoom today, I'll be promoting you to a full panelist. So I'll call your name. You'll see a window pop up asking you to accept that promotion. Once you accept it, you'll rejoin as a panelist where you'll be able to turn on your camera and unmute yourself. As a reminder to everybody testifying today, you do not need to give your physical address. However, please do identify yourself for the record before testifying. So with that, I will give folks just another second or two to get their hands up if they would like to testify on resolution number 23-5321. And I do not see any hands up. President Peterson.
Great, thank you. With that, I will close this public hearing. The Metro Council will be holding several additional public hearings, as you already heard. We are planning for 6 in total at upcoming council meetings. The next public hearing will be at our meeting on Thursday, April 20th. With that, no further action on the budget will be taken at this meeting. We will now return to our regular council meeting. So that, we will move on to our other business. Councilors, we have a big agenda item coming up with the solid waste fees update. And as you'll recall, we as a council gave direction last year to support rate predictability in our solid waste fees. Our direction was to set an increased cap of 8% over the next 5 years. In addition to giving you a reminder about our previous discussions, I would like to recognize the amount that there's a tension in our fee setting process with also what we have discussed in the past around the entirety of the system and the conversations that we've been having with stakeholders about how we work within that system as Metro, how we work with them, as well as the audit that is going on now. So as we move through this conversation, Melissa's going to facilitate us as we move through this conversation, and we are going to make sure that we capture comments related to all three of those buckets as we move through, because we'd like to have a future workshop just on our regional waste system and some of these other issues. So I don't want to lose some of the questions you may have or some of the comments you may have that may not be completely related to the annual budget conversation, but are really important as we move through this conversation for the bigger issue as we move into the next year. So nodding heads, does that make sense? I just want to make sure that we capture all that information. Okay, and I'm not too garbled coming through. That's good. So our fee setting process impacts everyone in the region, from our local government partners to business and industry and regional residents. As we've been starting to have planning conversations, as I said, a lot of questions are going to come up. So today's update is not going to answer all of these questions. We'll look to a future workshop to look at a lot of these questions, but I wanted to remind you, this is the beginning of that conversation, and let you know that we're going to capture those questions. But we have a duty to set our fees for this year, and that's an immediate deadline coming up, because our partners, the cities, also need to go out and make sure that they've got all their contracts in alignment. So they need to be able to plan their operations and run businesses as well. So it has a cascading effect. If we delay too much our decision on a rate setting fee, but there's these bigger conversations that may take a year plus to get through on the larger systematic issues. So with that, we are currently scheduled to take council action on the fees for the upcoming year at our April 27th meeting. And thank you for letting me set this context, because I think this is a really important topic. It's one I've been wanting to dig into the last 4 years, and it is finally coming to a priority moment. And I very much appreciate the council support in making it a priority, and our COO in making it a priority. So Melissa, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, President Peterson. Hello again, councilors. I'm joined today by Mark McGuire, our Director of Waste Prevention and Environmental Services, and our CFO, Brian Kennedy. As Council President Peterson said, our partners, both in local government and industry, rely on us to make a decision on fees. So we will be driving to direction today, and if we are feeling unclear about that, we're going to try to drill down and really get a sense of where you are as a council. As President Peterson said, as we go through the presentation and larger system questions or concerns pop up, we are prepared to capture those. Our wonderful Val Galstad is ready to make sure that we've got those on paper, pen and paper, on these chart packs, so that you can also see how we're wording those questions and make sure that we are capturing them appropriately. So our presentation today, we'll review quickly the direction from last year. Then Marta will give us some background on the regional waste plan, and particularly the values that serve as a basis of all the goals and actions in the regional waste plan. This is the plan which guides our work across departments in the system. And then we will go into the fee scenarios, and ask you to provide some guidance to us using those values as a prioritization lens. After that, Brian is going to provide an overview of the fee structure, share the fee setting process, and then we will move into discussion. Next slide. Actually, sorry, I should have advanced that. There's your agenda. Go forward one more. Great, perfect. So once again, last year we provided you with a 5-year forecast of tonnage. We looked at our 5-year forecast of expenses. provided some different options for you, and you directed us to go forward with a fee predictability model. That model caps increases at around 8%. And also, there was a value that was shared, value and direction last year, shared with us to try to maintain our current service levels and hours. So that is what we have done. Next slide. So this is the key question. Of all the scenarios that we discussed today, which align with your priorities? We encourage you to ask questions, to request clarification if things aren't clear. This system is complex, and there's no move that you can make in the fee structure that doesn't have a consequence or an impact. And there are many, many different players and stakeholders in the system. So we want to make sure that to the extent that there are trade-offs, that we are clear and transparent about those, and you have the opportunity to weigh them. Next slide. Okay, Marta, take it away, Director McGuire.
Thank you, Marisa, and thank you for the opportunity to speak to the Regional Waste Plan as a part of this conversation. The plan itself was adopted in 2019, and I know at that time, many of the counselors were not a part of the plan development, so I wanted to take a moment just to provide some background before we talk about the plan values. You can go to the next slide. The plan itself is a guiding document for the work that Metro and local governments do collectively for the garbage and recycling system. It's both a strategic level plan as well as a blueprint for the work. The plan also fulfills Oregon statutory requirements that the region have a waste reduction plan in place for the Tri-County area and outlines the roles and responsibilities. The plan recognizes the garbage and recycling system is more than just garbage trucks and recycling bins. I think we've learned this throughout our work here. It's about reducing waste, protecting people and the environment. It's about making sure that everyone has access to high-quality services, information, and economic opportunity. And it's about reducing the impacts of products throughout their lives. Almost everyone can point to an improvement that they'd like to see in the garbage and recycling system, whether that be at home or at work. And the plan includes values and a vision to guide these improvements and a specific plan of action that was shaped by community. You can see on the slides the 5 different phases the plan went through over an 18-month process that was iterative. For Metro, this was one of the first large-scale system plans to incorporate an equity lens as a part of plan development. This provided the opportunity for those most impacted by the recycling system to shape the goals and actions that you see in the plan to build a more inclusive future for everyone. Next slide. This slide outlines the plan's 6 values with equity considerations front and center. The values along with the principles and visions serve as the plan's foundation. The Regional Waste Plan connects these values from jobs and services to health and the environment to specific actions for achieving them, as well as indicators for measuring progress. And I look forward to sharing those metrics with you at the upcoming budget presentation. Later, we will be asking you to give feedback on the fee scenarios based on these values. Next slide. We also want to provide context that these values underpin the entire Regional Waste Plan, and they directly lead to specific actions, including how we set our fees. For example, one of the new areas of emphasis in the Regional Waste Plan centers economic well-being as a value and connects to the shared prosperity goals in the plan that direct activities to share the economic benefits of the system, such as good jobs with living wages and grant programs that provide investments in local communities and businesses. This has guided our resource allocations in our budget, and this is funded by our solid waste fees. As a whole, the plan provides a guide that Metro, local governments, community, and industry partners use to determine the focus over the next decade plus to improve our system for everyone. Council makes choices both within our budget and how we set our fees that directly support implementation of the plan. So with that, I will turn it over to Brian to talk about our fees.
Thank you, Marta. Again, I am Brian Kennedy, Chief Financial Officer for Metro. So we're going to go through kind of a long kind of description of how we make fees, what the fees are, and then our series of policy options that staff are presenting to council. So to begin with, the solid waste fees fall into two primary categories. The first category are fees that are paid at the Metro transfer station. So these are fees paid by self-haulers as well as commercial haulers at Metro transfer stations. And those fees include the tonnage charge or the mixed solid waste fee. There's a minimum load charge that primarily applies to self-haulers, and then transaction fees as well. On the other category is fees that are paid on all solid waste in the system. And so there are two primary fees there, the regional system fee and the community enhancement fee. We're not going to be talking about the community enhancement fee today. That is set in Metro Code and doesn't change. But we will be talking about the regional system fee. So next slide. So when we think about who pays the fees, just to reiterate, so we're talking about, two primary categories. One is those fees that are paid at the Metro transfer stations. Sometimes we describe it as the tip fee, and that includes the mixed solid waste fee or the tonnage charge, the regional system fee, DEQ pass-through fees, the community enhancement fee, and the Metro excise tax. And then the other category is the fees that are paid on all solid waste. And it's also really important to note that the little graphic on the right is showing the three primary material streams we talk about when it comes to solid waste. So mixed recycling and glass, garbage, and then yard debris and food scraps. The tonnage charge and the regional system fee apply to garbage, and really garbage only. We don't assess any fees on mixed recyclables and glass. And then when it comes to yard debris and food scraps, the only fees we apply are processing fees when those materials come to Metro facilities. So when we're talking about the fees in the solid waste system, we're primarily focused on the garbage material stream. Next slide. In terms of what the fees support, the chart above shows that it really falls into three categories. And the biggest category, and this is based on the current year budget, so regional garbage and recycling operations, the biggest component of that is the operations of the Metro transfer station, but it also includes the household hazardous waste program, as well as environmental compliance, and then safety and asset management. Planning and partnerships is another significant portion. And then the second largest is the services and community investments portion of the Waste Prevention and Environmental Services Department. But I think just from a kind of context, it's important to note that the biggest portion of our budget goes to garbage and recycling operations, primarily at Metro transfer stations. So, and then the tonnage charge and the regional system fee both pay for parts of that total budget. Next slide. It's also really important to put this in context. So when you look at local government curbside collection rates, so these are set by local governments. So Metro doesn't actually have any authority to set the local rates that residents and businesses pay. That is done by their city or county, depends on the jurisdiction. And then when you look at, so this chart is a composite of rates across the region. And so on average, the Metro portion of the fee, so the tonnage charge, the regional system fee, that makes up about 20% of the kind of average residential bill. So if you look at this average, so for a household garbage bill based on the current fiscal year, that's an average of about $37.71 a month. The Metro portion of that is a little under $10, $9.71. So, Metro has some ability to impact the overall household bill, but again, we represent about 20% of that total monthly cost for residential garbage customers. Next slide, please. So now we're going to move into the fee setting process. So we follow kind of a general industry best practice for setting utility fees. So we start with our financial policies. These are things like our reserve policies, if we use debt service, coverage targets, and performance measures. Then we determine the revenue requirement, and that is determining how much revenue do we need to raise to cover the costs of the WPES budget for a given fiscal year. Then we go into a cost of service analysis where we take that revenue requirement and we determine the cost for the individual programs and activities that the department performs. Then the final element is the actual fee design. What are the fees? How are the fees collected? And then, do we have fixed and variable charges? And then also doing a rate impact analysis. So who's actually going to be paying those fees? Next slide, please. The policy context for fee setting really includes three primary questions. So the first is, how are Metro's values reflected in the solid waste fees? And the primary value question here is, are the fees encouraging waste reduction and recycling? We don't want to take any action that encourages disposal or moving materials to the landfill rather than recovering or recycling them. The second question is, what's the basis we're using to set those fees? Are we setting them based on cost of service, or are we using some other methodology? In general, we apply a cost of service approach, as that is a best practice. And the final question is, who pays? Are we assessing the fees on the users or beneficiaries of the services, or some other basis? We have traditionally used a best practice and set those fees. Fees should cover the cost of service, and they should be assessed for the people that use or benefit those services. Next slide, please. We also have a set of fee setting criteria that the council has adopted. These are our high-level principles that we apply in developing our fee model and then running our revenue requirement through that fee model. Next slide, please. So the mixed solid waste fee and the regional system fee, the actual calculation, the fee model is very complex, but at its core, it really comes down to one calculation. So the revenue requirement, and if you look at this chart, so the column on the left, the mixed solid waste fee, and then on the right, the regional system fee, the revenue requirements are about the same. For fiscal year 23, it's about $45 million each. The set of programs for transfer station operations and then our regional system fee programs, the budget is about the same. But the quantity of tonnage we're talking about is really different. So we have about 1.5 million tons of garbage that we expect to move through the entire region. So the regional system fee is assessed on all that garbage. For the Metro transfer station, based on our budget for the current year, we expect about 575,000 tons of garbage. So the calculation for the fee is you take the revenue requirement divided by the tonnage. So those revenue requirements are about the same, but the regional system fee tonnage is quite a bit higher. So that fee is just under $30 per ton, and the tonnage charge at the Metro transfer station is about $78 a ton. Really showing that, the impact of only having about 40% of the tonnage in the region moving through the Metro transfer station means that we need a higher per ton rate at our transfer station to cover that revenue requirement. And when we think about that tonnage charge, what that's paying for is really the processing cost for that garbage that comes to the Metro transfer station, transport from Metro to the landfill, and then the cost of disposing it in the landfill. For the regional system fee, we're covering a wide spectrum of programs: regional system planning, innovation and investment grants, regulation of private facilities, the household hazardous waste program, Metro Paint, the RID cleanup services, the Recycling Information Center, local government grants, education and outreach, a wide variety of activities. Next slide, please. Some historical perspective is also really useful. So the chart on the left is showing the total tonnage charge. So the blue bar is the tonnage charge, the red bar is the regional system fee, the green bar is the Metro excise tax, and then the purple bar are the other pass-through fees that we collect. So you can see over the last decade how Metro's total tip fee has changed. So relatively flat for most of the decade, and then starting to increase in fiscal year 21-22. The blue line is showing total tons in the region. And those are really useful things to look at together because a couple of the factors that drive fees. So when tonnage increases, that tends to push fees down because we have more tons over which to spread our costs. But when costs go up, that tends to push our fees higher because we're spreading increased costs over a similar amount of garbage in the region. So over the last decade, tonnage has increased about 4.3% a year on average, but our revenue requirement has increased almost 8% a year on average. So that is a big part of the story for why our fees in the last couple of years have increased significantly compared to most of the previous decade. Next slide. So this chart is showing our revenue requirement, and so that's the bar. So the total revenue each year that we were trying to recover through our solid waste fees. The red line is showing the regional system fee tonnage, and the purple or gray line is showing the tonnage at Metro transfer stations. So you can see here, the revenue requirement has increased significantly, but it's also important to note that that revenue requirement has varied kind of considerably year over year. But if you think back to the prior slide and the total fees, that for most of the first part of the decade, fees remained relatively constant. A big part of that is that tonnage was increasing in those early years. And so when you look at the change over the last decade, so our revenue requirement has increased more than 100%, 106% over the last decade. But our regional system fee tonnage is only up 45%, and Metro tonnage is up 28%. It's also really important to look at the decade on a more granular basis. So over the first half of the decade, our revenue requirement increased at about the same rate as our tonnage. So the revenue requirement was increasing at 6.1%, and regional system fee and Metro tonnage was increasing around that same rate. But over the second half of the last decade, our revenue requirement increased over 9% on average, and the regional system fee tonnage was growing at around 2%, Metro tonnage around 1.8%. So the amount of revenue we were trying to collect through the fees has increased at a faster rate than our tonnage. So on average, that is going to push our fees higher. Next slide, please. It's also another important piece of context is putting our total tip fee in context with the West Coast. So if you look across the West Coast from Seattle down to the Bay Area, the average rate is around $174 a ton. Our rate this current year is around $123 a ton. The high is in the Bay Area at almost $220 per ton. So we are still considerably below a number of our kind of neighboring jurisdictions. Next slide, please. So moving into the process for fiscal year 23-24. Next slide. So setting context for next fiscal year, regional tonnage peaked in 2022, and our economic forecasts predict that tonnage is going to grow more slowly over the next several years than it has over the last decade. So for the next fiscal year, we're actually predicting tonnage to be below where it was in 2022. And we've also had increased costs for Metro transfer stations and our regional programs as well. Councilor Nolan, do you have a question?
I was just celebrating that reduction in waste. That's what our mission is, reduce waste that goes to the landfill.
Absolutely.
I thank you, Brian, for asking for clarification because I didn't know what this was. So thank you.
So tonnage is expected to grow more slowly, but our costs are increased. We have significant increase from our operations contracts at the Metro transfer stations, increase resulting from our agency indirect cost allocation, and then increased staffing in WPES as well. Next slide. Tonnage comparison, this is a little bit of a repeat from earlier in the presentation, but you can see that for fiscal year 24, we expect that tonnage for both regional system fee and the mixed solid waste tonnage to be down over the current fiscal year. And those are budget estimates for both years. And actually for fiscal year 23, we don't expect that we'll actually receive this much tonnage, both regionally or at Metro transfer stations. It's also important to put in context the other materials, so clean wood, yard debris, and then residential organics and commercial organics. We don't talk about them as frequently, in large part because the quantities are just so much smaller than the rest of the materials. Clean wood, 2,000 tons compared to 1.5 million tons region-wide. So we expect tonnage for next fiscal year to be about the same as what we actually received this year. And that means that about 37% of the solid waste in the system is going to move through Metro's transfer station, both dry waste and wet waste. It's also important to note the tonnage forecast for fiscal year 24 is a forecast that my office developed. It's slightly different than the forecast that Marta's office developed for use in the tonnage allocation. Next slide. The revenue requirement for next fiscal year. So we start with the fiscal year 22-23 revenue requirement, which is a little over 106 million. Some of the significant increases, there were increases in staffing and operations support at about $1 million in WPES. The Metro Central operating contract changes increased costs about 5.76 million. We had a 5.6 million increase from the Metro cost allocation plan, and then we had some other miscellaneous expenses across a variety of program areas that increased costs around 3.67 million. In total, that means the revenue requirement for fiscal year 23-24 is over 122 million. So an increase from 106 million in the current year to 122 million next fiscal year. Next slide, please. Another consideration we look at in setting the fees are there areas where we're subsidizing costs? And there are a handful of areas where we're doing that. So in the current fiscal year, we are not charging the full cost of service for residential organics and commercial organics. Particularly on the commercial organic side, that has been driven by a desire to incentivize the recovery of that material. And while that program is getting started, not to make it pay the full cost of service, we also undercharged our transaction fees and our minimum load charge in the current fiscal year to reduce the impact primarily on self-haulers at the Metro transfer stations. Next slide. So Council has a variety of policy choices to consider when looking at the fees for fiscal year 23-24. So the first option is to charge the full cost of service. So that revenue requirement I just showed of around 122 million, that would be to collect that full $122 million. That would increase materials charges to our full cost of service and enabling some increases in programs and activities. The second option is to just not increase fees, maintain our fees at the current fiscal year level. We still have to balance the budget. If we were to do that, we would need to make significant reductions to WPES programs and activities. The third option is to set fees consistent with the council direction last fiscal year around having a predictable model, so not increasing fees more than 7 to 8% a year. We would recommend some strategic material subsidies, particularly commercial organics, as that program is still in the implementation phase. And then achieving a balanced budget through some use of reserves and underspending, strategic underspending in the Waste Prevention and Environmental Services Department. A fourth option, driven by some requests from stakeholders, would be to freeze the regional system fee. So continue to set the mixed solid waste fee at Metro transfer stations around the cost of service, but then just not increase the regional system fee. We would still, again, need to achieve a balanced budget, and to do that would require significant reductions to the Waste Prevention and Environmental Services budget. We also think that this would require extensive stakeholders, or extensive feedback with stakeholders or engagement, and would likely be challenging to implement prior to July 1st. Then the fifth option would be to consider changing the fee structure that we use. So change how we assess fees for regional programs as well as the tonnage charge, and this also would require extensive engagement with stakeholders throughout the region. Next slide, please. So we're going to go through the specifics of each of the policy options. So option one, charging the full cost of service. The total estimated revenue requirement is around 120 million. This would result in about a 15% increase in the total tip fee. So the total tip fee would go from around $123 to about $142 a ton at the Metro Transfer Station. In this scenario, the WPES budget is fully funded. It provides the maximum flexibility. We can have a fairly robust capital improvement plan, and that would be primarily investing in deferred maintenance at our Metro facilities. It doesn't include any significant expansions. In terms of how this would affect other partners in the region, private transfer station owners would likely support this, in the sense that this provides the largest possible increase in the mixed solid waste fee. Many of the private transfer station owners match their price with Metro's price, so the more we increase ours, the more they can increase their fee. The local government partners would likely oppose this because they would have to pass these fees along as part of their local franchise collection rate setting process. There's a significant increase in the minimum load charge in this scenario, which could potentially result in some increase in illegal dumping. And then the increase in the regional system fee would likely be opposed by parties that generally favor that fee either decreasing or not increasing significantly. Next slide. The second option, maintaining the fee, so not changing it from the current fiscal year rate, this creates a $16 million operating loss in the WPES budget, and then a total $20 million deficit. Across all scenarios, we're assuming using around $4 million of fund balance to fund capital investments. But in this scenario, adding a $16 million loss on top of that could not be sustained with the solid waste fund. We would need to make significant reductions to the waste prevention and environmental services budget if we chose not to increase fees for fiscal year 23-24. So operating costs and levels of service would need to be reduced kind of across the department.
Clarification, Madam President?
Yes.
Thanks. Brian, you described a $16 million operating loss. Is that a loss from current revenues?
That would be a loss next fiscal year.
It is a gap between what you want to spend and what revenues would be available.
Based on the proposed budget.
Okay. I think that choice of words is incorrect. You're not losing anything, you're just not getting something you want.
This is based on the proposed budget. So if we were to implement the proposed budget and not increase fees, we would under-collect revenue by $16 million.
Okay.
Thank you. And while we're on this, Brian, I didn't want to, I was going to wait, but I think I need to ask a question going all the way back to the beginning on the terminology revenue requirement. And I think what you're saying is that it is to the proposed budget, the revenue needed to cover the budget.
That's correct.
Correct, because revenue requirement sounds to me legally binding. And not at this point a proposed budget ask, right? So I just wanted to make sure that I understood what you were saying and that there's nothing I should be aware of in terms of a legal requirement.
That's correct. It's referring to the proposed budget.
Okay, I think clarifying that for future, just for everybody, I think that would be helpful. Thank you. Councilor Rosenthal.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a real quick question. As you mentioned, we came up with this, or we prioritized this leveling, this 8%, before we had the inflation problem. What would you estimate is the inflation impact? I mean, some of these things are costs, whether it's labor or gasoline, particularly gasoline and some materials. You have to replace truck tires and so forth and things like that. What is the inflation level that we're looking at compared to the 8%?
Councilor Rosenthal, I don't have that number off the top of my head. And inflation impacts our budget in a variety of different ways. So we have some contracts that are explicitly tied to specific CPI indicators published by the federal government, but we also have costs that are driven by, for example, the recently renegotiated Metro Central operating contract. So we're not tracking kind of a metro-specific inflation indicator, but rather looking at how do kind of the combination of cost drivers affect the metro budget.
Okay. A complicated process.
Correct.
Councilor Rosenthal and Council President Peterson, would that be a helpful question to capture for follow-up, a little more detail on the cost drivers, including inflation?
If it's something, some detail could be provided without a great deal of effort, that would be.
Excellent. We will capture that. Thank you,
I want
Val.
to divert staff to.
Madam
Great, thank you. Oh, Counselor Nolan?
At that point, Ms. Madrigal, are you saying, I hope you're saying, the drivers could we categorize them between inflation, which Metro doesn't have levers to change, but discretionary choices like added services or added staff are things that the council has some discretion over? So could you separate them, the drivers, into those categories?
Yes, we can absolutely label the things that.
Thank you.
All right, continuing. So in this scenario, the only increase is from the Metro excise tax, and that is because the Metro excise tax is a formula set in the Metro Code, and it adjusts on an annual basis and doesn't require action by the council to change. So there's a 40-cent increase per ton on the Metro excise tax in this scenario. From a customer and partner implication perspective, this would likely be opposed by private transfer station operators, again, who often match their price to ours. They are experiencing inflationary increases much like we are, and so no increase in the Metro fee would limit their ability to increase their fee. Local government partners would likely support not having to pass through fee increases, but they would likely be opposed to the service reductions that their constituents would experience if we had to make those choices. Users of the Metro transfer station, again, might support no increase in fees, but would likely not be supportive of the service reductions that would be required to make that a reality, including things like reduced open hours at the transfer stations and household hazardous waste facilities, potentially reduced days, reduced staffing on site, potentially. Let's go to the next slide. So option 3, setting the fee at that 8% ceiling, you can see at the bottom the total tip fee increases about $10.22 a ton for an increase just over 8%. One thing that's important to note is all these numbers are not final at this point. We need to go through the third-party independent review and refine things. We don't expect any significant changes, but just don't hold us, to anything kind of after the decimal point in particular. The total revenue requirement in this scenario would be to generate around $110 million. So in order to do this, we would need the WPES department to underspend their budget by $6 to $7 million, which this is not kind of an unusual level of underspending. It would require kind of close budget management by Marta and her team, but this is something that is kind of relatively easily achievable. It just limits their flexibility in being able to kind of fully expend their budget. We would also need to ensure that we had some underspending on the capital budget. And this would use around $1.7 million from our rate stabilization fund, primarily to minimize impacts to the transaction fee and the minimum load charge. From a customer and partner implication perspective, the increase to the mixed solid waste fee would provide some relief to private transfer station operators. This would, the total percentage increase is 9.7%, so they could increase their fee if they are matching Metro's fee There may be some opposition to the increase in the regional system fee. And again, for our local government partners, this would be consistent with the direction that council gave last year. I think many of them are expecting increases in that 8% range. Next slide.
We've got two questions. I'm sorry, before you move on, we have two questions from counselors, Counselor Simpson and then Counselor Lewis.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Brian, on the proposed budget, and I'm going to go back a couple of slides, you said you had 122 million of revenue you were looking for. On the proposed budget, it said 123. And here it says we'll lose an estimated $10 million in underspending. Could you clarify where the missing million is from your slide as opposed to the budget that was presented to us earlier? And then also, where do you see that strategic underspending taking place?
So the difference between the total revenue requirement that we showed earlier and the revenue requirement here is we have some offsetting revenues and other underspending that we anticipate in the budget. So we know that we don't need to necessarily collect every single dollar. So that's the reason for the discrepancy. And the numbers we have on these slides. So for the full cost of service, collecting around $120 million would allow us to collect the full cost of service for both Metro transfer station operations and regional system fee programs. On the underspending side, most of that underspending tends to happen in regional system fee programs. We provide kind of maximum budget authority to the WPES department to implement and execute programs. In any given fiscal year, you have a variety of circumstances that happen. Staff positions that are vacant, people that leave, and there's a delay in hiring, delays in getting programs off the ground. Some programs come in less expensive than others. So the underspending really runs across a whole variety of programs. And it's just kind of the normal level of underspending that we have seen in the last several years from the WPES department.
Thank you.
Brian, thank you. I'm going to actually ask you to repeat using different language the answer to Counselor Simpson's first question of the difference between the numbers, because I thought I understood what you meant by revenue requirement. That's why I asked, and now I do not understand.
So the revenue requirement, that reflects from a proposed budget on the expenditure side. So the total amount of expense that we expect to incur in the next fiscal year. The amount we actually need to recover through rates is a little bit lower due to offsetting revenues that we may collect, as well as some kind of very specific types of underspending that we might see in the budget. So we need expenditure authority. If we were to charge a full cost of service for $122 million, from a rate perspective, we only need to collect around $120 million to really meet that full cost of service requirement.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Counselor Simpson, did you have any follow-up?
No, Madam President.
Thank you. Counselor Lewis.
Sure, thank you. I guess just struck by these conversations being back to back, and why we would make the choice to direct a department to strategically underspend to a specific amount if we are making the decision before, say, the 27th of this month, when we could still get an amendment in and reflect that on paper in our budget.
Councilor Lewis, that's an excellent question. Part of the reason is around providing the department flexibility. So by directing underspending, we maintain that flexibility in the budget. And so if we have increases in tonnage, particularly regional system fee tonnage, that comes in higher than our budgeted estimate, they would be able to execute on more programs, or if they had savings in other areas, they could shift resources in order to kind of take advantage of opportunities.
Okay, I understand the first response in that all of this is based off of an estimate, and we can all hope for the day that we come in above instead of below. I do think that if we are seeing dramatic shifts and swings between program needs, that's the whole point of a budgeting process or a budget amendment process. So I can understand where we are with respect to all of this being an estimate, and it is all squishy until we actually see the trajectory of tonnage as it comes in, and if we were right in our estimates or not. You're always very right from my experience over 4 years. But I think my preference would be to at least engage on where we would see those cuts or those underspends in a budget process, if possible. Thank you.
And to follow up on that, I'm sure we're taking note of that specific comment. But I think I would just like to echo that as we move through this process, that we get it a little, I think we're a little tighter. And know that this council is willing to engage on those conversations as they come up during a year. And asks to move money around. But I think we want a little bit more transparency, and that's why we would be asking for that tightness. Committee says that, is that a valid way to put that?
Thank you, Council President. I'm still processing a little to think about how to best capture and respond to the concern. I think, to reiterate something that Brian said, the level of underspending that we're talking about for option 3 is consistent with a normal level of underspend that WPES has, implemented in the past, and not even implemented, but there's just certain categories of things. For example, in this labor market, when you have a vacancy, it is taking a lot longer to recruit someone. It's a tight labor market. You have to do a lot more work to get the same number of people in. So there is sort of naturally across the board more salary savings than perhaps in times when, there were a lot of folks looking for work. But that's just one category of potential underspend. Another category might be capital projects, because we all know that, cities are struggling to permit and inspect projects. So we might have something budgeted for a best case scenario, but we don't know that we will have the speed to meet that best case scenario, but we want to be prepared if we do. And so that's where you have, that flexibility that Brian was talking about, making sure that we have the appropriation if we meet that best case timeline, which we may in some instances, but that's hard to predict at this point before we start that work. We do know, however, that there will be some percentage of underspend in salary, in positions, in capital projects, and it could be something also like you have some money for consulting or a contract that starts later than anticipated. So I think we can absolutely be transparent in where we're seeing those things, where that underspending is tracking over the year. But I would definitely recommend that, because we're not suggesting a level of underspend that is outside of what the department has experienced in the past, that it's in alignment with recent history, that we simply track and report back to you on that underspend. And if, tonnage is worse than expected, we will have to be coming back to you to talk anyway, to make sure that we are not overspending our budget. How does that sound?
Okay. I'm going to Councilor Lewis also, who made the comment, but I think she stepped out for a moment.
No, I'm here.
So I think Councilor Lewis, how does that sound?
It sounds right direction. It's starting to gel.
Thank you. And we can, we will summarize this meeting and send it back to you all. The findings and direction from this meeting in our decision log, and we can make sure that at that point that the written summary comports with what you're thinking.
Thank you.
And just one final note.
Thank you. And Brian, and what I would like to summarize on this is that I think we want to have a documentation of what we're kind of expecting, but the risk assessment, right, of what could happen, the underspend, and then that would be used as the basis for kind of the reporting going forward. Does that sound right?
We can absolutely include a risk assessment.
Okay, thank you. All right, Brian.
Thank you. One final note on the prior option. So that level of underspending still kind of expects WPES to spend around 95% of their budget. And for a large operations department at Metro, that is a very typical level of underspending. That's not kind of unusual at all.
Thank you. Councilor Rosenthal, before we move on.
Just a quick question about underspending. The last session, they passed a Waste Reduction Act that is going to affect some of the waste streams. Do we expect that to have any impact one way or the other? It could reduce waste load, it could reduce, tonnage, and it could also make things more efficient in some way. Is that likely to have any effect, or pretty minor?
I think you're speaking to the Recycling Modernization Act.
Right.
Yes, so there is, as a part of implementation of that act, which is in process right now, the rulemaking, there is services that will be funded by producers. So there could potentially be, as we look towards material depots in the future, services provided and funded elsewhere that may change the dynamics of the system, not in this immediate next fiscal year, but in years to come.
Okay, thanks.
And MARTA's staff, when they're doing their tonnage forecast, they do try to factor in impacts, economic impacts, as well as material recovery program impacts on the waste stream. All right, moving on to option 4, which would be freezing the regional system fee. And this is based on feedback from stakeholders, particularly in the private transfer station side of the solid waste industry. When staff were developing this option, which just to be clear is not an option that staff are recommending, the way we would structure it is proposing to not change the fee model. As I mentioned before, our fee model is complex. It uses a number of calculations to allocate non-specific costs, things like departmental overhead, agency overhead, department investments in things like diversity, equity, inclusion that aren't attributable to specific activities. So like the waste prevention and environmental services DEI program, we don't know how much of that is attributable to solid waste moving through the Metro transfer stations versus the regional system fee. So we use a series of proxy calculations to allocate those costs by material type. So we're not proposing to change the fee model and change those calculations. If council were to select this option, staff would suggest just not collecting the increased regional system fee that the fee model would indicate is necessary. So we'd leave that the same. This is not consistent with the development best practices because we're not letting the fee model reallocate those kind of administrative costs using the proxy calculations. And we would likely get a comment from our independent fee model reviewer on this option. If we were to do this, this would require a budget reduction of $3 to $5 million from regional system fee programs in the Waste Prevention and Environmental Services Department. We would not be able to accommodate this simply through underspending. This would require actual reductions in order to offset the loss of that revenue. We would have reductions in both programs and operational services as well as the capital program. We would still need to subsidize at some level the transaction fees and minimum load charge, and we would reduce our reserves by around $2.6 million going with this option. This would likely be supported by private transfer station operators that would prefer to see little or no increase in the regional system fee. Local government partners might be supportive of not having to pass through a fee increase to their local residents, but would likely oppose the program reductions that would be necessary to make this a reality. Users of regional system fee funded services like household hazardous waste or the Recycling Information Center or regional collection events would experience reduced hours and options for services. Next slide. So this shows a summary of all the options. If you look at the total MSW tip fee at the bottom, so our existing tip fee is $123.45 a ton. In option 1, which charges the full cost of service, that would increase to $141.78 a ton. Option 2 keeps it the same. Option 3, using that 8% ceiling, the total tip fee is around $133 a ton. And then the option 4 is around the same amount. We have a larger increase in the mixed solid waste fee. The staff recommendation is to go with option 3, so following council direction from last fiscal year, to set the fees at the level that we indicated to our partners that we would last year. Next slide. One other way to look at the difference between the options. So option 1 on the left, this is showing the revenue requirement. So option 1, we would need to collect around $120 million to fully fund activities. And then this shows the difference in the options. So option 2, we would undercollect by around 20 million. Option 3, around 10 million. And then this slide is older. Option 4B, the freezing the regional system fee, we would undercollect by around $13 million. So you can see the impact on waste prevention environmental services budgets in each of those scenarios. Next slide. There are a couple other fee issues for council consideration. So on commercial organics, the staff recommendation is to continue to subsidize the commercial organics fee as the program is implemented, and so limiting that fee increase to 8% for fiscal year 23-24. For our other materials that we process at our Metro transfer stations, the staff recommendation is to move those costs to the cost of service over the next 3 years. Again, remember, we're talking about relatively small quantities of materials. And then for the minimum load charge, the staff recommendation is to implement option 3, but we could consider evaluating a different cost recovery model as part of a larger conversation about the regional system fee if council desires to have that conversation. Next slide. At this point, I'm going to hand it back to Marisa.
Thank you, Brian, and thank you, counselors, for moving through all that information with us. We sort of framed up these questions to link back to the values. Which values from the regional waste plan are most important to consider when weighing the trade-offs between the different policy approaches? Which policy approach should we use to develop the fee proposal for next year? And are there any other policy considerations that we should incorporate into the analysis in the future or into the fee proposal? Before we go into questions, I will just make a pitch for the staff recommendation to continue the rate stabilization at the 8%. I think that our staff is very open to looking at the system, asking those bigger questions, looking at the rate model. And I think also collectively, staff and council have a value of engagement and making sure that we're talking to our partners and our stakeholders. And as I said at the outset of the presentation, if I've learned anything about this system, there's no lever you can pull that doesn't have a consequence or a trade-off or an impact on a business, on a city, on a person. And any big swings that we make, any big changes should be considered carefully and in community with our stakeholders. So happy to answer any questions about the slides that we haven't gotten to. And then again, I'll try and help facilitate and capture any big system questions that come up. Thank you.
Thank you, Marisa. I'll turn it over to you to call on folks as the facilitator for this portion of the conversation, and we'll listen and weigh in at the end.
Great. I see Councillor Wong's hand up.
Great, thank you, and thank you, Marta and Brian, for the presentation. Very clear different options to consider. I was particularly struck by the comparison with some of our peer cities. And, I understand, as Councilor Nolan mentioned, that our goal is to really reduce waste that ends up in our landfills. And that's one metric that we're really tracking. So I guess my questions are, how is it that our fees are, significantly lower than a lot of our peer cities? Like, where is that coming from? And I had a question for policy making around the impacts of higher fees. And if we have data from peer cities that do have higher fees, like what is the impact of those fees on things like illegal dumping? Like, do we see a lot more illegal dumping in San Francisco, for example? And also, if I'm remembering Econ 101 correctly, like what is the, I guess, elasticity of the fees? Like, is there a scenario where with higher fees, people take waste reduction and recycling and all that more seriously, reducing, kind of waste that goes to landfills because of higher fees, or is that not a thing because it's not very elastic? So I think having some context around like what are our peers doing, and what are the impacts kind of on the ground potentially that we would see here would be really useful for policy making, and also just understanding option one a bit more.
Councilor Wong, I will let Marta answer any questions around the peers. I know our system is really unique, and I don't personally have a lot of knowledge about how those other systems function. When it comes to the elasticity of demand, that is really kind of one of the essential questions that we have been grappling with in my time here at Metro. A number of staff in Marta's department have looked into the academic literature in this. It seems like, based on the best available evidence, that it's pretty inelastic. People will pay whatever it costs to get rid of their garbage, or at least we are not in a range of fee where it is high enough to change behavior. I mean, at least has been our experience. We don't have kind of a lot of natural experiments in this regard to really test the impact or knowing like where that breaking point is. But so far we haven't experienced any changes in behavior, and the academic literature seems to suggest that we're not in that realm right now.
And in terms of the peer jurisdictions, we wanted to include some comparable rates. That was something that Councilor Nolan had requested. As Brian noted, we are a quite unique system, and it's difficult. It's really apples to oranges. So we provided those to give you context of what the costs look like at cities of similar size and similar programs, but those cost drivers and factors and how contracts and the management of the system is quite different. So we can get you that. I don't have that information with me now, but I'm happy to provide follow-up information on sort of the composition of those rates and why there may be differences or are differences from our system.
Marta, is it, at least some of those cities also contain cost recovery for new facilities? Mm-hmm. Isn't that right?
King County, yeah.
Mm-hmm. So that may be part of the difference. Mm-hmm.
Big fancy new facilities. They were part of the panel presentation that provided information on their long-term capital strategy. This is the question that will be coming in front of council as we develop the facility system plan, is looking at what is our long-term capital strategy for funding new infrastructure investments and maintaining our current facilities, and how does that intersect with how we set up our rates? So that's a conversation that is upcoming for this council.
Thank you. And if, we were looking at option one more deeply, like what would the impact be to regular consumers on the ground as fees are passed forward? Do we have a sense of that?
If I remember right, the total tip fee, if we were to go full cost of service, I think is around $140 a ton. So compared to $133 a ton in the option 3. So that's about a $10 per ton difference. So based on our kind of a composite estimate across the region, like the average household, whatever average means, disposes of somewhere in the neighborhood of 3/4 of a ton of garbage in a given year. But just for the sake of easy math, say they threw away a ton of garbage in a year, so they would be charged an extra $10 a year based on that higher tip fee if their garbage went to the Metro transfer station. So somewhere less than a dollar a month is the difference.
Great, that's helpful, thank you.
I see Councilor Lewis still with her hand up, and then Rosenthal and Simpson.
Sure, thank you so much. Old habits die hard. I guess to start with, as you're doing follow-up on the comparative cities, I understand why those are our comparators in terms of size and the sort of system we aspire to. I would love a couple of our closer neighbors, in particular, looking at maybe City of Salem, if there's a rate that seems comparable from a city on the outskirts, Canby, Sandy, something like that, because I think when folks are looking at the system and the services, they look at, if I just lived, 20 minutes down the road, what would I be paying, as opposed to if I lived in the Bay Area, where we are not surprised to see costs be higher. So anything you can do in setting that context in your follow-up. I'm generally supportive of the staff recommendation. I do think that we are about to hit a point at which we need to look at option 5 and build from the ground up a way that the system will work. In particular, looking at a brighter line between the two sides of house, which right now there is no clarity. Even after an hour, I'm still kind of seeing pieces shuffle back and forth. So in the immediate need to get rates set in the immediate budget year, option 3. But I think looking longer term, for bright line, for stability, and frankly for looking at stakeholders and players that are non-traditional to make sure that they have an opportunity to be part of the process. I'd be very supportive of focus groups looking at bulky waste. I think I've hit on this in previous presentations, but the bulky waste connection here is through that minimum, and that minimum fee. I was jumping on the railroad tracks at our last fee setting. I'm not going to do that this year, only because I believe bulky waste is coming with some proposed solutions, and I'm going to have patience for one more year. But I think bulky waste and that minimum fee have to be solved for, because right now we are far behind what I think people expect in terms of getting rid of something big, annoying, heavy. That's why it's ending up on the curve. That's why it's ending up in the ditch.
Thank you, Marta. Do you want to just touch on the bulky waste project?
No, thank you for that comment. Since the adoption of the regional waste plan, bulky waste has been a priority for the department. It was one of the items we heard most about in community conversations. As we've shared before, we're preparing to do pilot of collection programs for different types of services to address bulky waste. And I'm happy to provide an update to council on where that project is at. We've been working in partnership with local cities to determine what is the best design, because it's not necessarily going to be a one-size-fits-all. And tackling bulky waste, it's going to be multiple solutions in order to address that problem. But that is at the top of our list, and I appreciate your patience, and we're going to see progress in this next year. Thanks.
Thank you. Councilor Rosenthal?
Thank you, Operating Officer Madrigal. I have, first of all, a comment. I mean, I appreciate the difficulty in comparing systems, because the systems that I'm familiar with, they're usually either mostly all public or all private, and the hybrid system that we have is very difficult to compare with a lot. I mean, Tacoma is the only one that comes moderately close, I think. Well, maybe San Jose, I'm not sure. So that's one comment. My concern is having to do with inflation. I'm a little worried. I mean, I pretty much support alternative 3. I'm a little worried that we're going to run a cropper coming up in the future with inflation that may affect, we may need to raise it from 8% to 10% to sort of make the curve flatten out, or I should say the costs flatten out. And then one request, in the future, if it's possible, it's not too difficult. Councilor Nolan talked a lot about, our goal is to reduce waste. I think it's very hard in terms of total tonnage, because of course the waste stream changes and people change and habits change, and now we have packaging. Is there any way we can estimate for different streams the generation of waste versus recycling of waste per capita? In other words, population is growing, or maybe this year it's not growing, depending on who you believe. So this changes. It's not just the total waste, it's the waste per capita. And I think our goal overall and a value is to reduce the amount that people throw away and increase the amount that they reuse or recycle. And I think that's the main goal that we have in the long term. Anyway, so if that's possible sometime in the future, it'd be nice to have a report that has some idea of where we have been in per capita usage.
Thank you, Councilor Rosenthal. Brian, do you want to?
I believe WPES and the state have estimates, particularly around the non-garbage materials. I know those numbers are kind of squishy because a lot of the material collection for particularly the mixed recycling and glass, they don't have scales. So, we either have kind of volumetric estimates or less specific estimates than that. So, but the state has done a lot of work in this area.
Okay.
Yeah, Metro works collaboratively with the Oregon Department of Environmental Quality to do periodic waste composition studies, where we take a look at what are the materials in the waste stream that allows us to look at both waste generation and per capita. One of the metrics that we'll be sharing at our budget, we'll be sharing some of these metrics at our budget presentation later this month.
Thank you. Great.
Councilor Simpson, your hand is down. Did you get your questions answered?
I believe so. I think that my question was tied to option 5 and really how we are planning to deal with the systems issues. And I think, long-term and short-term. And I think Councilor Lewis raised those concerns, so I'll put my hand down. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Simpson. Councilor Nolan.
Thanks, Madam Chair, temporary chair. Madam President, couple of issues that are interspersed. A lot has been said about the value of preserving natural resources as one of the values for this system by way of reducing waste. And Marta, you referenced state goals and Metro has goals. To answer your question, Marisa, that would be a top priority, a top value for me. And we have to acknowledge that what we've been doing for the last 10 plus, 30 plus years is not working. And we have to deal with the reality we have now. So I would be looking for pretty disruptive changes in order to change the trajectory. So that's a value I would have here. I also would prioritize a value of shared prosperity, I guess, or shared economic impact. I'm particularly troubled that while we dismiss as almost rounding error the impact of this fee, if we accumulate it over years, I don't think that's fair. And it's an inherently regressive fee. Lower income households pay a higher percentage of their income for this service than higher income families. And I generally object to that as a structure. I prefer a progressive form of taxation, particularly, this is not a tax, I understand it, but an unavoidable fee. The way to avoid it is to dump your trash in the street, and we don't want to encourage that. So I prefer a progressive system. I know we can't have one by the time it would be implemented for this fiscal year, but I'd like us to keep that in mind, as I agree with Councilor Lewis that option 5 is really where we need to be as soon as we can. Finally, I would like to nurture local innovators that both provide different approaches to recycling and waste disposal, but also different approaches to cost containment. And it is that aspect that leads me to lean towards supporting option 4. As the value being supporting innovation, supporting local providers of services, and it happens to be that it is also a racial equity, has a racial equity result in supporting workforces and business owners that are building wealth here in the BIPOC community.
Thank you. President Peterson, I'll hand it back to you.
Oh, okay. Well, I guess just from my own perspective, I'd like to go through some thoughts. First of all, I want to thank the staff for putting together this presentation. There's a lot that we have had to kind of think about in terms of the system and how it relates to this budget request and the 8%. So I guess I would just say, in balancing all of the interests at this moment, as far as we can go within the timeline, I think the staff recommendation does a good job balancing that. And so I would preface it with my conditions of approval of moving forward with the 8% at this time, in the good old EIS language that we are so fond of at Metro. One, I want to make sure that as we move forward, that we're having that we should understand that our first value is in the reduction of the waste stream. But I feel like we need to have a full conversation on what the impacts of that are in the marketplace and what that would mean. So I guess in light of that, I'd like to think about structuring a workshop about reverse engineering back from different levels of strategic goals. If it's a 10% reduction over 10 years, if it's a 20%, I don't know what that would look like, but reverse engineer back what would be required to get to that level of reduction. And then what would be the impacts? Because I feel like we're moving right straight into a gas tax conversation where gas is becoming less and less and less, but we're highly dependent on that revenue stream for transportation. And if we're going to do it, it means a complete and utter change in how we look at how we structure fees in order to do the public good, which is the second part, I guess, part of the conversation that I think that we need to workshop is what services are in the public good that are not being provided by or would not be provided by the private marketplace? And can we push on that a little bit and find out what would need to take place in order for the private market to actually be interested in providing some of these services that they're not now? That's a conversation. The third one is if and when we get to some sort of wrapping our heads around that public good, then what can be put on the different fees that's different than the way we've been assuming it now? And lastly, and this is the one that just keeps coming back to mind, what is, like, this comes back to the entirety of the conversation. What is Metro's role in getting to that outcome? And how are we playing in the marketplace, and are we incentivizing or disincentivizing? So there's a lot contained in all those. I tried to go pretty high level, partially because the minute we start to dive down in the different fees, I can get very lost in all of that. But I think that's the several workshops that I think that we need to have of how do we start figuring out what is Metro's role into the future to get to the goals, and how does that affect the marketplace? So, yeah. Lastly, I just want to just make sure on the record, we did get a letter dated March 21st, 2023 from the Metro Area Private Transfer Station Facility Companies. And I just wanted to make sure that, one, that their issues are also put on the table as part of that conversation. I think I kind of got the high level portions of it, but the biggest one out of there is, I think around the way we are starting to make progress towards this transparency and how we're making decisions, how we define the public good, and then how the money is actually used and what is it benefiting. So I think if we can just, I don't remember if that letter has been responded to yet, but I think we need to also just encourage us to make sure that we're echoing back what we're hearing and making sure that we're answering those questions in a bigger form.
Absolutely. President Peterson, just to address the letter, tomorrow, in fact, we have the next in our series of budget forums that our partners in industry, as well as our partner jurisdictions, are invited to hear, a special budget presentation for them, and it's an opportunity for them to ask questions and delve deeper into the WPES budget, as well as the fee structure. We've held many of these forums over the last year and a half, 2 years, so would encourage the signatories to that letter and any other interested partners to come to that, and happy to share that information out to you all. And I believe that Director McGuire is also going to be meeting with those signatories on Thursday to further discuss and process those concerns. One thing, as you were, as all of you really were talking about the desire for waste reduction, for policies that really shift the system, I just want to, highlight that work that you're describing is funded by the regional system fee currently in our current system. So the tension that we're talking about with certain industry partners wanting higher rates on our station fee and lower rates on our regional system fee could have, and again, this goes back to my original point that there's no move you can make in the system without something popping out. That could reduce our ability to enact strong policy, to regulate industry, to do our educational programs that reduce throwing people throwing things away. We support our grants, I&I grants through the regional system fee. So the policy work, the work that moves our system and our region forward is currently paid for, and this is the current system, not speaking about any, if we get to an option 5 where we're looking at the fee model, that could be different. But in our current system, the regional system fee pays for that work. And the transfer station, the tonnage fee, is really paying for the operations at our stations, at the actual work of receiving and processing garbage. So I just want to call that out as attention because I think it's important for us to hold that as we try to find the balance here and make progress on the goals and the values that you have for the system that I think we're all committed to.
Thank you. And as you were speaking, and I agree with that, you pinpointed the tension. I think the last condition of approval is that we get commitment to getting a plan for the audit. I know we're already moving forward on some of the issues related to the upcoming audit, but I want to make sure that we have a full conversation of the plan to deal with the immediacy of some of the issues and then the long term. How are we going to walk through that so that we get to a decision and not leave these things kind of spiraling and undecided? Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you. Counselors, it sounds to me, if I'm hearing you correctly, that on the whole, the council, with some exceptions, is sitting in the scenario 3 direction right now with a lot of questions about how we move forward with the entire system and the audit. So if I'm not hearing that correct, that we have a majority leaning into scenario 3 for this budget, looking forward to more conversation about how we change the way we do business in the future later. Say your piece. I think that's where I heard everybody was, for the most part, was coming down. Councilor Nolan, I think you said you were on scenario 4, but I think the majority were at scenario 3, correct? Councilor Wong.
Yes, I just wanted to flag that I'm still thinking about option 1 as well. I don't think I have a definitive statement yet between 1, 3, or 4, but I do know, we've all experienced increased costs over the past year, and option 1 does fully cover everything that we expect, and it doesn't seem like it's a substantial hit this year to consumers. So that's one option I'd like to see a little bit more of the data on in terms of what our peer cities are up to.
Thank you. Sure. Just with the recognition that we did promise rate stability to our partners in the local jurisdictions, with the recognition that everything you said was valid. I just want to repeat that again.
Thank you.
Yeah. With that, I still see a majority move for the staff. Obviously, questions from some counselors that need to be answered, but a majority so that you have direction coming out of this meeting to be able to move that into the budget.
Thank you, President Peterson. And we've also captured all the systemic questions. And since we are very close to time here, what we will do is repackage those into an email to make sure that they reflect your intent. And we will edit and answer as needed.
Thank you. And just a reminder to the council, when that email comes out, do not respond all.
I will send it individually.
And with that, seeing no other hands raised, we'll move on then. Thank you again to the staff for that conversation and background and future discussions. We were going to have a legislative update, but you will be receiving instead an email from Annalisa summarizing later this week due to the time constraints. And I'll move on to our COO communication.
Thank you, President Peterson. Just a few short items today. You may have seen the emails from the help desk that Metro was targeted in an SMS or text phishing attack last week. That means that bad actors have culled from our website different, not only cell phone numbers, but also our organizational charts. And we're texting Metro employees on Metro phones, pretending to be people with authority in an attempt to get our employees to buy gift cards and do other things. Luckily, our employees have actually been reading our phishing emails. So I want to say thank you to Metro staff for being smart and cutting off those phishing attempts at the knees. Nobody bought gift cards, but it's just an example of kind of the constant barrage of different threats and things that Metro as a government faces, and also a great example of our employees doing the right thing and IT jumping on it with our cell phone providers to block all those numbers. My last update is just a sad note that the zoo did lose a black bear last week, Dakota, a beloved member of the zoo family. I know that our staff, is devastated by the loss, as is our community. So just wanted to acknowledge the work of our team to try to save him. And express our gratitude to them for the work that they did, even though it didn't turn out the way that we had hoped. We have a great team over there that is growing stronger and stronger every day, and this is a tough blow. So if you have an opportunity to reach out to any of your relations or friends at the zoo, please do. Thank you.
Thank you, and that was indeed a rough go, and I can't imagine what they went through at that moment, and they did everything they could.
That's right.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Thank you.
Counselors, anything for counselor communication today? Counselor Simpson.
Thank you, Madam President. We have a request from the Latino Network to support their Oregon their request of $4 million to help complete the capital funding needed for the construction of La Plaza Esperanza. This is going to serve the Latinx community, youth and families in East Multnomah County, and provide a replicable model that can be used to serve the Latinx communities across the state. I know we're at time, so some quick highlights. This community plaza will touch on early childhood education, youth empowerment, and violence prevention, as well as family stability and community support. And they're asking for our support on a letter to utilize our name in that effort. I wanted to ask the rest of the council, was that okay? Got 3. And any questions? 4. Oh.
Councilor Lewis has a question.
Is this?
Go ahead, Councilor.
This is a request of the legislature for $4 million as part of the end of session capital bill or lottery bond bill, or what is this?
I believe this is for the capital bill.
I think it's lottery bond.
Probably lottery bonds. I am happy to have a letter on Metro letterhead that expresses support. I do think we need to include there that this is not a sole ask, and that we actually will have many asks in that bill, and that we are a good partner, and probably for just purposes of our legislative update we didn't just have, we should have a separate letter with all our asks. But I'm happy to lend support broadly in that context.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Councilor I'm going to look to Marisa, actually. Marisa, on that note of, and can we just work with Annalisa to get a list of what those would be and get those out to council of what the requests may be for us participating in, and make sure that if we do a letter, it reflects all of them?
Absolutely, happy to.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Wong.
Great. Thank you, Madam President. I just wanted to recognize our DEI team, especially Andre Beeler. We got the notice last week that TriMet has officially joined our Construction Careers Pathways program, which is a huge accomplishment. So I want to thank the team and also our partners at TriMet.
Perfect. Congratulations. That's a good one. Any other communications? Seeing none, the council meeting is adjourned. Our next regular meeting is scheduled for April 18th, 2023 at 10:30 a.m. See you all there. Thank you.
Recording stopped.
Okay. Do you have any specific ideas for how to make waste collection more progressive? I'd be interested in